I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hi, and welcome back to the Business of Story. Park Howell here for you. And over the past 220 episodes now, I can't believe it's been that long, 4 years of doing this show, we have pretty much always focused on how to help you craft and tell your brand story. And of course, it's important because, when you clarify your brand story, you amplify your impact, meaning you grow your business and you grow your people in the process. And when you clarify it, you simplify your life because it helps you get very clear on the things you say yes to that help advance your vision and mission. And maybe more importantly, you get very clear on what to say no to, those things that simply don't benefit you and your folks. But what if, after all of your work in defining and or refreshing your brand story, your people aren't aligned with your message? What if they aren't even empowered storytellers at this point, that they need to be to really be successful and to ensure your success, to pay off all of that hard work you put in to get your story straight in the first place? Today, we have an expert who will provide practical insights on how you can enroll your people into your brand story to help you win customers and grow repeat business and word-of-mouth marketing. Chris Wallace is the co-founder and president of Interview, which is a marketing consulting firm that helps companies effectively align their brand strategy with their customer-facing employees and partners. Chris builds upon previous success as an entrepreneur in the sales consulting world and in the coaching space, as well as his more than 15 years of sales, marketing, and corporate leadership. Chris helps companies better align the strategies of the boardroom with the daily execution at the front lines. Beyond his work with clients, Chris is able to apply his passions as a teacher and author. He has taught as an adjunct MBA professor at Temple's Fox School of Business and has been published in outlets such as Harvard Business Review and Chief Marketer, and is a contributor to publications including Inc.com and Forbes.com. Chris received a BA in Public Relations from Syracuse University's Newhouse School and his MBA from Temple University. And he's here today to help you focus your external brand story inward to grow your organization and your people. Chris, welcome to the Business of Story.
Park, thanks so much for having me.
Man, when you filled out your form as to why you wanted to be on the show, I got to commend you. It is one of the best we've ever received. And it was so unique because, to me, you are like a brand agency, not focused externally on the brand story, but helping brands focus that story internally to get their people to buy in, to enroll into that story. And probably, as you put it, the most important thing is to deliver on the promises you make in your brand storytelling to the world. How did you get into this business?
How long do you have for the podcast? That's like most of your guests. You arrive at these places through kind of a twisty road, but
take us to a moment then. Take us to that first moment that stands out in your life that was like, aha, this is what I need to be doing.
I'll take you to that moment. I know what that moment is. So I've been in the professional services space for a number of years, had my own firm, and had merged with another firm, decided that their direction wasn't necessarily the direction I wanted to go. And a partner of mine and I had the opportunity to take a couple of months and really sit down and think about, where we saw opportunity, where we had success with our clients, what were our best relationships. And what we did was we looked for all the connecting points between those things. Where do people like working with us the most? What were our favorite projects? And we really spelled out what the common threads were. And we looked at those common threads and we connected those dots. And it really came back to this idea of brands are spending so much effort and energy to bring new products to market, to bring new campaigns and promotions to market. And working with people at the front lines, we just saw those initiatives falling on the cutting room floor, for lack of a better phrase. I mean, we really saw these organizations spending so much and investing so much to reach their customers with a message, but their own people were being the gatekeepers of that message. And when the phones rang or somebody walked into a retail store, what they spent so much to deliver to the customer wasn't coming through at that point of customer contact. So we looked at those commonalities, those common threads, and it sort of hit us that this idea of interview and this idea that organizations really need to market to their own people the same messages that they market to their customers really kind of struck us like a lightning bolt.
And what kind of company was this? Was it an ad agency or what were you running?
Well, we were in the sales consulting space. So a lot of what we were doing, we were working with frontline teams, sales, a lot of call centers, retail, and we were in that space. But what we found happening was the service that we provided was unique. And we were going into these organizations and we were talking to the sales teams, and we found ourselves losing deals to sales training firms. And we looked at it and we said, that isn't even who we should be competing with. Like, that's not, what we're doing is not the same as theirs. So either they're looking at it the wrong way or we're talking to the wrong audience. And really the repositioning with, when we left and decided whether or not we were going to start up again, we just looked at it and said that the market need was too great for this type of service to not start up again. So that's why we started Interview.
Okay, so does this play to the age-old challenge, it seems like, that sales doesn't talk to and connect with marketing? And marketing is out saying one thing externally and making these promises, and sales are out doing something completely different?
I could give you a long-winded answer, but the short answer is yes. I mean, this is, marketing to sales alignment, especially in the industries that we work in, is a big challenge. On the consumer side of the world, the gap between marketing and sales is even wider than it is on the B2B side. And we've spent time in both worlds, but the gap is really big. And the budgets on the consumer side for marketing and branding are really big. And to make those promises, but not connect those dots all the way down through to your frontline teams, especially in this age of customer experience, it's a real risk and it's a real gap for most companies.
Well, yeah, with Yelp and everything else out there, technology has handed the advantage to the consumer out there, and they become your brand storyteller. And if they have a bum experience, boy, are they willing to share that with the world.
That's absolutely true. The lengths that companies have gone to really reach those customers and deliver a great experience to them is extraordinary. And what we find is, as they look for future advancements and additional ways to build that connection with customers, it's amazing to us that they're not looking right. A lot of organizations are not looking right underneath their nose, and that's at their own employees. Their concept of how to engage those employees is so different than their concept of how to engage customers, and we can't understand why. Humans are humans. So we see it as an opportunity to really bring a lot of the things that they do well on the marketing side and pull those in-house and really engage their own teams in a compelling way.
Yeah, when I looked at your website, your agency at interview.com, INNERVIEW.com, my first take was, they're a branding firm. And then the more I looked at it, I go, actually, they're not. They're an internal branding firm. They go out and they work with a brand story that's already been created, working with agencies and others, and you turn that to an internal focus. And my question is, why is there a need for that? And the reason being is, why do leadership ignore so much their internal folks when they are like their number one customer or their number one audience to tell their story? Why is there that disconnect there?
That's the number one question that we get asked. Why are companies bad at this, or why is there a disconnect? And I don't think that ignore is the right way. I wouldn't say ignore is the word that we would use. I think that organizations have relied upon a certain set of levers that they could pull, so to speak, to reach their internal audiences. And you even look in the last 20 or 25 years, internal communications has really grown as a discipline, and companies using internal communications to reach their people. But what we've seen is most of the efforts that companies use to engage their employees and try to drive this alignment around their brand is very information driven. It's information, it's emails, and we have research on this. The top two ways that organizations push information about their brand out to their employees are product trainings and emails. And we look at those sort of information driven vehicles for getting information out. They're fine if you want people to know something, but we look at it and say, if you want people advocating for your brand and serving your customers in a 21st century way, they really need to believe in your brand, not just know what you have to say, but they really need to believe in it. But because so many of the mechanisms that companies use are information driven, it's about telling them more and trying to make them experts. We don't believe that that's driving the belief that they need. So that's what we try to focus on, is really picking up where knowledge leaves off and really get people to that point of true belief and advocacy.
So is that through more experiential training and that sort of thing, where you're sitting mano-a-mano, belly button to belly button with your people and say, this is what we stand for and why, and help us express that?
A good question. So I'm going to pick up what you said with experiential. There's a lot of ways to do experiential. And the answer is yes. We really believe that experience and emotion are going to be, how you close that gap from knowledge to belief. So a lot of what we do is we are helping people experience the information in different ways. Through some research that we did, we published a research study with a customer insights firm called Focus Vision earlier this year. And what we found was, while email and product trainings were the two most popular and most frequent mediums for getting information out, the ones that really were driving the needle were things like peer-to-peer interactions and events and things that were much more experiential. And it was such an organic finding from that research. And it really aligned with what we believe in here, is find a way to help them experience the brand, the employees and the brand representatives. They don't have to be employees. A lot of brands have people representing them that are third parties or retail partners or distributors. We look at them as no different than an employee. They represent your brand. They should be on message. But reaching them, it's hard. And organizations look at it and they say, we're struggling to get the mind share that we want, so we're going to double down on all the things that we normally do. We're going to send out more emails, and we're going to do more product trainings, or we're going to do more incentives. But the reality is that's not moving the needle. They've oversaturated those tools. We look at it as find those experiential mechanisms, and whether it's belly to belly, or we do peer-to-peer sessions virtually where people are all over the country, but they're interacting with their fellow peers and sharing ideas and best practices. And we find that moves the needle a lot more.
Yeah, interesting. You and I are of like mind in that area, in that I am working and training with a Chicago-based consumer packaged goods ad agency right now, and they happen to be dispersed. So they are a virtual agency, and they do work with big brands. And we're doing that very thing in helping them understand their own brand story. And we're doing it Zoom session, live video. In fact, I did an 1.5-hour session with them today, training them how to use these storytelling techniques. And in doing so, we asked them to go out and find stories that both represent their own personal brand, and then how that personal brand is expressed through the agency brand. And in doing that, they build these storytelling chops that then they can use for their own client brands. And I have found, just like you, I've tried to do the online courses and I've tried to do these other things where these self-studies, and I have not had nearly as much effect or impact with that I have with peer-to-peer. There just seems to be like nothing like that.
Peer-to-peer is irreplaceable. In terms of getting people to think and act differently, there's no better mechanism that we've ever found than peer engagement. So that's every engagement that we work with, every project that we work on, every client, there's always some element of peer-to-peer in there. And whether it's virtual, or in some cases it's through like an intranet or a Facebook, workplace by Facebook or something like that. We're doing one of those right now. Finding some way to get employees interacting with each other and them selling themselves on the ideas versus the company handing them a script, that doesn't work anymore. Getting people to engage with one another, that's what drives behavior.
Yeah, without a doubt. Can you take us to an experience maybe you had as a consumer where you saw this tremendous disconnect between what the brand is telling you in their advertising and what you were actually experiencing, say, at the retail counter?
Oh, I have a really good one, and it came up not that long ago. I have a 6-year-old son, and my son is anything that has a stick or a ball or anything you can compete on, he's interested in. anything to do with sports all the time he's interested in. And he's always running around playing in the yard, playing a sport, and he burns through sneakers really quickly. This past summer, we bought him a pair of sneakers. I'll hesitate to say the brand. I'll hint at it, but bought him a pair of sneakers.
Oh, come on and say it. We're full disclosure on this show.
Okay, so shortly after the Zion Williamson from Duke shoe blowout incident, my son got a pair of Nikes from an outlet, and about 10 days after, the bottom came apart from the top. The glue wore off, and they just pulled apart. They were destroyed. They were defective. And we went back to the outlet with the shoes in hand and said, we need to exchange these. And a representative, when I walked in, said, sure, no problem, go up to customer service. So I went to customer service. And the person at the desk said, we can't help you. And I said, why not? I bought them at the outlet. They're clearly defective. This guy said he could help me. And he came back, he got another manager, and he said, we can't do that in store. We don't handle defective merchandise in store. Here's a phone number that you can call. And it struck me at that moment. I thought to myself, this is the brand of just do it. This is just do it. Almost everybody on the globe knows just do it because their brand is so strong. But the promise that conveys is we knock down barriers, forget red tape. We get the job done. We don't take no for an answer. And here I am standing at the counter at Nike with a pair of defective shoes that was their fault. And they're saying to me, I'm sorry, here's some red tape. So I just thought that was such a tremendous disconnect between the brand that Nike promises to be and that experience that I had. And they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And it made me uncomfortable as a consumer. And I thought to myself, this is so disconnected from who their brand wants to be.
Yes, total cognitive dissonance there. On just the juxtaposition of that, I've told this story one other time, but here's now a shoe company that's got it right. I was in Chicago at a workshop this time last year, and I had left my dress shoes at home. So I had to race down to Michigan Avenue. I went into a Johnston & Murphy, and I bought these beautiful blue suede wingtip shoes. They looked really cool. I was dealing with a financial firm there, so I had my blue suit on, and I was looking good. I went, did the workshop. Everything was great. Chris, 6 months later, I decided, I need to get an extra pair of black shoes just so I've got a little bit more variety going. I go over to Scottsdale Fashion Square, living out here in Phoenix. My wife and I walk into Johnston & Murphy, and there's the exact same pair of wingtips that I bought that were like 40% off in the window, big sell. I walk in, and I don't even say anything about thinking that I'm going to get any sort of refund or whatever, but I just casually mentioned to the lady behind the counter, I said, oh, I just bought those in your Michigan Avenue store, but apparently I paid 40% more than they are now, but oh well, I need another pair of shoes. So she fits me without saying a word with a whole nother pair of shoes. She comes up and she takes 40% off of those, and they were not on sale, but just as a thank you for being a loyal shopper. Now there was someone with a just do it, mentality. She was empowered to do it. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And I've told that story over and over again, and I will buy my next pair of shoes from Johnston & Murphy because of it.
It's a great example. I mean, you and I are clearly shoe men, so that's a good. That's a good.
Well, I'm not. That's my problem. That's why I'm racing around trying to find shoes at the last minute. Let's move over to the study. I downloaded it, and you can download it too at interview.com. The title is "Have Your Story Straight?" ? Why Brand Message Dilution Hurts in the Experience Economy. And again, what captivated me about this is the inward focus of brand story creation and buy-in. Can you take us through just some of the high-level findings that you guys uncovered in this that underscores the problem at hand and how brands, even no matter how well they've got their story straight externally, how they are diluting it by not getting their internal people to buy into it?
Yeah. So a couple things I'll point out. It's really interesting how organizations, a lot of times they think in terms of facts and don't necessarily rely upon perceptions. But the reality is perception is fact in a lot of these organizations. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. We found several questions that we asked kind of led us back to this idea of how confident are you that the people inside your company can tell your brand story consistently? And we found 2/3, 66%, it was marketing, customer experience, and product management professionals. how confident are you that people can tell your brand and product story consistently? 2/3 said that they did not have confidence, at some degree, some lack of confidence, that the people inside their company could tell their brand story effectively. And if you were to have somebody do a training and go through a confirmation of learning, they may be able to click on the right thing and the right answer that they were trained on about their brand or about a product. But that doesn't mean that they're telling the story consistently. Just because they know it doesn't mean they believe in it. So when we ask in a moment of candor these executives whether or not they think people can tell their story consistently, 2/3 said that they were not. We asked the folks, okay, if you are telling your story consistently, what would that be worth to your company? 62%, so nearly 2/3, valued that at, actually our highest category was $10 million in revenue plus. So north of $10 million, 62% selected that. Our only regret in the study was we didn't provide a higher number. We didn't provide a $25 million number. Organizations are having the story break down, and it's costing them money. That one-on-one interaction like you just described and I just described, there's a breakdown there. If the brand is not coming through in that interaction, you're losing incremental sales. So that came through loud and clear in the study. A couple other quick things I'll point out. One thing that we thought was really interesting was the rate at which companies, and these were mostly larger companies, 250 million in revenue and above, but the rate at which they were introducing new go-to-market initiatives that included products and service launches, it included campaigns and promotions, things of that nature, rebranding. Half of them were introducing new products and services on a quarterly basis. 73% were introducing campaigns and promotions on a quarterly basis. So the story is evolving and changing so fast, and they're bringing so many things to market that it's almost no wonder that there's misalignment. But if you're moving that fast, you have to change the mechanisms that you have in place to prepare your team. Otherwise, you're just accepting that your team won't be prepared and they won't be on message. And that's the ultimate problem that we're trying to help them root out.
It reminds me of one of my all-time favorite Gary Larson Far Side cartoons. It has no caption to it whatsoever, but it's a drawing of a forest, and up it through the evergreen trees, the fire lookout, where the Forest Service sits up there and they survey, and the fire lookout itself is burned down. They were so busy looking for the fires externally that they didn't see that their hot plate had caught on fire. And it's the same sort of thing you're talking about here. They're so eager to push that story out and launch new products and so forth that they're not paying attention to the people internally that really need to buy into and align with that brand story.
That's absolutely true. When you were doing your intro, one of the things that I immediately thought of is a phrase we use frequently, which is we call ourselves marketing or branding insurance. You do all this work to get your brand out there. You do all this market research to get the messaging right. You spend all this money in advertising and digital and things like that. And the reality is, what if the customers actually show up? What if you drive all this demand and people believe in the message and they actually show up? Well, you actually have to convert them at that point. And that's these organizations, these companies are leaving so much money on the table. We jokingly call it marketing insurance, but it's actually true. You spend so much. If you were to put a little bit more on this, the return you would get out of your original marketing investment is huge. That's why working with marketing organizations, when we go back to them, we can say your conversion went up by, double digits. That means your cost to acquire went down by X. That means your effectiveness of your overall marketing program went up in a pretty dramatic way. So once you start looking at the dollars and cents of it, it's not hard to realize that a little bit of insurance can pay off a lot.
Well, it's a little bit like selling a race car and then letting all the air out of the tires. You got a beautiful car, but it's not going very fast. It's not going anywhere, and it's burning up a whole lot of fuel to do that. So what can people do? What are some of the insights that our listeners can take away today, short of bringing you all in to help, but what are just some basic things, blocking and tackling, they can do to get their people to buy into their brand story?
Great question. So I'm going to offer up a couple. I always like to have people walk away with some really clear, tangible actions. The first is you got to ask your people what they think. Organizations have gotten really good and they spend a lot of money, billions of dollars on market research. Simply asking your people that represent your brand what they think of it. It sounds so simple and kind of like an aha, but organizations don't do a great job with it. A lot of times what they do is they'll do an ad hoc Survey Monkey or something like that, or something through their intranet every once in a while. but it's not really designed in a scalable way. What we suggest companies do is, even if you start out simple with a survey, send it out, but continue to send it out on a regular interval. Get people used to kind of seeing this feedback loop established, and that you want to continue to gather the information. Otherwise, what it seems like is, well, every time it serves, Jim or Sally back at corporate, they send me a survey, and all the survey is doing is really either trying to justify their job or try to make them look good. If you really want to know what people think and you ask them on a regular basis, it is going to provide such amazing intelligence for your business. We've built out our own proprietary process around that we use with our clients, called the brand transfer study and the brand transfer score, which really measures the alignment around the messaging. But any organization can create a survey, come up with a set number of questions or a set group of questions, and ask those on a regular interval so they can build that two-way dialogue with their front lines. That would be the first one.
Let me ask you real quick on that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we move on to your next one. How important is it to try to actually get in front of your people and sit down with them and ask those questions versus just doing it through another survey?
I think that, so we do both and we use them in tandem. I think that being able to gather the information, especially in large organizations, with some tonnage, right, to be able to get a lot and have some statistically relevant data,
right.
The survey is really useful, but there's no substitute for getting out there and doing the eyeball test. Or if it's a call center, listening with your ears and seeing what you see and hearing what you hear, and comparing that to the data that you have to see if it either validates it, if there's some conflicts. There is absolutely no substitute for people getting out. I will say this: if you talk to the typical marketing person who goes and spends a day or a week out in the field, they typically come back horrified. I mean, they really do. They come back horrified, and a couple things happen. Either they're freaked out and they start trying to change a bunch of things, but then it sort of falls off, or it's so bad that they just sort of ignore it and go back to what they're doing. If you're going to go out and you're going to listen, you're going to ask, you have to be ready to act. Don't go do a town hall. Don't go do a focus group. Don't even send a survey if there's not going to be any action behind it, because that actually leaves you in a worse spot.
It makes sense. I had a guy on the show just a couple of shows ago, show number 215, Khalil Ashanti, and he started as an actor, and he was actually in the Air Force, and he was a part of a traveling troupe in the Air Force acting. He wrote a play that hit Broadway and so forth, and he said essentially the same thing, that the most horrifying thing for any of us communicators, actors or content marketers or whatever, is to go and ask how your content, how your brand story is landing. But it is, as painful as it might feel, is probably the most important thing you can absolutely do to really understand what your audience is thinking and feeling and adjust, course correct accordingly. And that's a bit what you're talking about. And not only course correct, but it's going to reveal what you need to train them, how to train them, and how to get them aligned.
It provides you a roadmap, right? Most and you asked the question earlier, why do companies struggle with this? And they struggle with it because they sort of bury their head in the sand and they say, okay, we have all the information. We're just going to continue to force information down their throat, attach the fire hose to their face and try to push the information down their throat. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work to the level of effectiveness that they need. So understanding where the gap is and addressing it in a much more elegant and surgical way is really the approach that we take with organizations. But you can't do that without information. If you're not willing to ask, your option is to either go really wide and send a lot of information and scattershot and sort of spray and pray, or don't do anything. And we find most organizations really opt for that spray and pray. And a lot of times more information creates more noise and it actually exacerbates the problem. It doesn't make it any better. So being able to pinpoint where it's breaking down is a lot better than just pushing out a bunch more information.
Yeah. What's your next point you were going to make?
My next point goes back to your question about why are they bad at it? And it really is they haven't concepted a different way. They look at it as let's do more. They look at it as we haven't done enough to this point, so let's do more of what we've done. They haven't concepted that maybe they weren't doing all the right things, or maybe what they were doing needed a complement. I would encourage anybody who's listening, anybody in an organization that is trying to gain adoption for some sort of new initiative, to come up with some different idea to deliver a different delivery mechanism for that message. It could be an activity, it could be a game. What we do for our clients, we do anything from We're working on anything from virtual reality to escape rooms to food trucks to custom pizza box. I mean, anything you can do to change up the delivery of that message and force somebody to engage with it in a different way. And like you said earlier, experiential. Okay. What's more experiential than food, right? Make the message about the food and weave it in. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And a simple example, we took an organization, they did webinars for everything, every new product launch, every new initiative. It was a webinar. And we asked their sales team through one of our studies, how do you want to consume this information? They said, please, no more webinars. What we did was a podcast series. And we continue to do a podcast series where they're out calling on their clients. They're out in their cars all day long. They can consume the information on their time in a mechanism that really meets them where they're at, so to speak. And they can engage with the content in a much different way. And oh, by the way, all of the content is programmed by their questions and their feedback. So they're listening to stuff that's really relevant for them instead of another webinar. Creating a podcast isn't hard for somebody to do internally, but it changes the delivery mechanism and forces people to experience it, not just sit there and click through a webinar or a computer-based training.
And in something like that podcast, I would imagine you would have to give the employees kind of a time frame in which to listen to the different episodes so they don't just blow them off. You've got to build a little bit of urgency. So you might, once a week, roll out a new insight about the brand and say, this week we're covering this. Be sure you've listened to it at least by the end of day Friday.
So it's a great point. And one thing I will say about the podcast, it's a great example of treating them like consumers, not treating them like a subject, so to speak. What's so great about the podcast is people will say, well, how do we get them to listen to it? You put it out there, you promote it, and you do good content. Okay, well, what if they don't listen to it? That's okay. That's their choice. But if you have 100 people and 30 choose to listen to it, and they're going to consume that content, and it was their option, they opted into listening to that piece of content, are you going to move the needle more by doing that, by having 30 people choose to be involved, or forcing all 100 to sit through another webinar? What's going to move the needle more? It's not about perfect, it's about better. And we look at these tactics and say, if organizations can get over the fact that not everybody's going to do everything all the time or be experts in everything, and start to put out some new and fresh ideas and tactics, you're going to get a lot more improvement that way than if you just rely on the same old tactics. So I really encourage people, think as far outside of the norm as you possibly can, and don't be afraid to try something. Anything different is going to be better because it's going to force people to pay attention.
Let me pick up on that 30 number because I'm happy that you landed on that. It's been an experience I've had. Do you find, and to overcome this objection that a client might have, well, if they're not all listening to it, it's not working, that you have 1/3 of that 100, the group of 100 people totally into it. They're going to listen, they're going to be on board, and they're going to go for it. You're going to have 1/3 of them that are on the fence, and they're going to listen to some of it, and the idea is to tip them over to get them to the point that they're listening to a majority of them. And then you may end up with 20% to 1/3 of them that just aren't going to do anything with it. I mean, that just seems like what I've seen in the trainings that I've done is how it plays out. And to get your client and you, listener, don't worry about 100% adoption. What Chris is saying is, gosh, 30% adoption is pretty big and can really move the needle. So let me stop right there. Is that what you've experienced?
Yeah, I think that organizations need to accept the idea of better rather than perfect. And in the effort to be perfect and get everybody to say the same thing, getting on a webinar and saying, go out and say this. I had a corporate, a very large consumer organization, head of learning and development, say to me one time, why would we do it your way? Why wouldn't we just get them in a room and tell them what we want them to do? And my response to him was, how do you know you're right? They're the ones out there talking to the customers every single day. How do you know you are right? And when we look at it, it's not about forcing information down their throat. It's about giving them it's marketing is about pull, not push. You talk about this in your storytelling. It's about engaging people and pulling people through and threading them through a consistent story. That's what this is all about. Get them to opt in. Get them to ask for more. Get them to want more. Get them to say, I like that episode. When's the next one coming out? That's pull. That's doing it in a way that actually makes them want to be a part of it. And you're not going to get everybody. Accept it, embrace it, and be really happy with the performance that you're going to see from the 30. We would typically say you should never expect more than 60 to 70% of any population to adopt anything. They're just not going to. It's okay. It really is okay. But man, if you can get the 60 to 70% even better than they normally are, that pays off huge for companies.
And to your point, when the leader says, why don't we just go in and tell them what we want to do? Just ask yourself, when was the last time you did anything someone told you you should do? It's just not the way we operate for the most part, especially those hard-charging, hard-driving sales folks and marketing folks out there that want to have their independence and empowerment. They're not going to sit there and buy into what you're telling them to buy into. They have to experience it.
You don't tell customers that they have to buy your product. You paint a picture of why they want to do it. You're putting them in a position where, one of my favorite authors, a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer, always says, nobody likes to be sold, but people love to buy. And marketers put people in the frame of mind where they're excited to buy something, excited to engage in something. It really is, it's a lesson that organizations need to internalize and make it so their people are excited to do something and want to do it, not being forced to do it.
What's one of the most unique delivery mechanisms you've seen in this process of connecting with, your customer, your internal customer, your employees with a brand message? You had mentioned the pizza box thing. I was just sitting here trying to think, how do you make pizza, your delivery mechanism? But what's one of the most interesting ones you've seen?
Well, so we actually just hired a creative strategy director. We hired somebody out of the agency world to come work with us. And we consider ourselves more of a consulting firm. We're more of a, we do the analytics and we go in and build the strategy. We also do the execution, but we're not a marketing agency. But we hired somebody out of the agency world to come in and really be the phrase we use for her is she's our alchemist. Her job is to come up with all the ideas that we can utilize, we can put into play. One of the ones that I really like, there's a couple that we've been working on starting to implement. One is, I mentioned virtual reality. I think that in the customer experience space, for organizations that have people spread out, in a lot of different locations and things like that, being able to highlight what one of their peers is doing, but in a way where it's not, a testimonial video, yawn, people like, oh, another video, or it's not an email, congratulations to Jim, look how great Jim's doing. People get sick of hearing how great Jim's doing. But if you start dropping VR goggles out in retail locations and people put their cell phones in it, or there's a phone in the store, and they can watch what their colleague does, and they can feel like they're actually going through that experience with them. You talk about bridging a lot of miles. And the funny thing is, VR might sound expensive. It's a lot less expensive than most of the trainings that these organizations push out. And a 4 or 5 minute VR where you're almost interacting with one of your colleagues is much more powerful. I mentioned some of the food-related ones. We're really into the food-related ones. Anything from sending custom pizza boxes where the message on the pizza box is something specific to you can get fortune cookies that have a custom message inside. There's a lot of different things. And I mentioned food trucks that have specific menus where the messaging is all tied in with the menu items and things like that. So there's a lot of, think about how brands are activating with their consumers externally. It's a lot of these types of things, but again, organizations just haven't thought to bring it inside yet.
I really love your reframing of employees as customers, because we all are. We absolutely are. And to take those same efforts and that same creativity you use to attract the world inside is to get your internal world attracted to your brand story and how they can buy into that. I really like that. Take us to a company, and if you want to withhold their brand, that's fine too, that you see that they're doing it really well, that have been able to turn that from telling their audiences what to do internally to getting them to buy in.
Well, I'm going to go with a company who has one I talk about frequently, who has their U.S. headquarters right here in the Philadelphia area, and that's Subaru. And I think about how bad the auto space is at this. And it's funny to say that my prime example usually is Subaru, but I'm going to ask you, Park, do you know what Subaru's brand statement is?
I don't know the brand statement, but I can tell you their one-word theme, I believe, is love.
Love.
Yeah, love. It's about love.
What makes a Subaru a Subaru.
Exactly.
And That's their brand promise. And you talk about a bold brand promise, taking on love. One of our other clients uses awesome. And that's another really big phrase to take on in branding. But Subaru has somehow taken that idea of love and woven it into not just what they do externally, but all the way down through their dealerships. I was just at an event recently where Subaru was sponsoring like a dog swim, like people bring their dogs and they go for a swim. And the people from Subaru were the sponsors and they were there. And just the way that people believe in that brand and believe that they actually make the world a little bit better every time they sell another Subaru, that comes through in your interactions with them, really every touch point. So in terms of that consistency and that alignment, not only do they have a bold statement, but they've somehow found a way to pull that through. The only way to do that and be successful is to start inside the company and have it flow out. Most organizations do the opposite. They try to brand themselves outside in, and organizations like Subaru prove that that's not the way to do it.
Do you know some of the tactics Subaru is doing internally to get their people to buy into it?
Unfortunately, I don't have their dossier. I wish I did. We know somebody who used to work really closely with Subaru, and a lot of what kind of the anecdotal feedback that we've gotten is they engage their dealerships. So dealerships are independent, right? They're not employees of Subaru. They're independent dealerships. They're locally owned, and they just do a lot. Honestly, one of the things they do a lot in their hiring processes. They do a lot. They bring in people who they think are aligned to that message and who believe in it before they get there. They do a lot at the dealership level to make sure that they reinforce that message. They do a lot of community give back. They involve their employees and their sales associates and things like that. So a lot of it just comes down to walking the walk. We're going to say love, but we're going to make sure we back that up with doing things that really conveys that idea of we love our employees, we love our customers, we love the environment. All those key things that are part of their message, they just walk the walk at each step of the way.
I'd imagine Southwest Airlines is probably another good example of that. And the fact that they put that heart on all of their planes. So in the fuselage, as you're walking on, you see that heart right there and it says, we actually care about you. And then, and how they deliver that in air service. I mean, pretty much is pretty consistent across the board.
That's absolutely true. That's another one we use frequently at Southwest.
Yeah. Really fascinating stuff. Where can people learn more about you and the good work you guys are doing?
Well, you mentioned the website earlier, so it's actually interviewgroup.com.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, Park. And as Park said, it's INNER, so inner, like looking inside, like taking an interview. Interviewgroup.com is the website. Park mentioned that our brand dilution study is up there. It's a really good, smart, sort of tactical. There's some smart tactical takeaways for anybody that's in the marketing space in there. Recommendations. You can find me on LinkedIn, Christopher E. Wallace. So just the extension on LinkedIn is Christopher E. Wallace. There's a lot of Christopher Wallaces out there. So I'm the one in Philadelphia who works with Interview. So that's the best place to find me and engage with me. Email is cwallace@interviewgroup.com.
I am so embarrassed that I have diluted your Interview Group brand right here on a show about how not to dilute the brand story.
Park, I can promise you that I have a person on my team who is diligently trying to secure interviewgroup.com. It's not a done deal yet, but we found the person who has it and we're working on it. So
you mean
maybe in the future.
Well, I'll look for my pizza next week from you then to get me to buy into that brand story. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for being here, man. Really interesting stuff. I love the space that you're in. And if you have any one last parting thought for our listeners that they could go and do right now in their business, what would that be?
I'm going to steal a word that you used earlier that is near and dear to my heart. You used the phrase reframe, and we really we care about the fact that we're helping to reframe this challenge for marketers. And I would simply say my challenge to you is look at the people who represent your brand as consumers of it, not people to be forced into compliance. It is 2019. Nobody wants to be forced into compliance. Force yourself to reframe how you look at those people and look at them as a customer of your brand and somebody you want to consume it and choose to believe in it. Not to be you can't force belief, but look at them as an opportunity to really build a brand advocate and have people opt into loving your brand. And I know that's a little more philosophical, but force yourself to reframe those folks as the key audience here.
Yeah, I'd argue it's not philosophical. It's a really terrific activity to do, to sit down and think about them in a whole new way and get them to embrace your brand story. So thanks so much for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us today, Chris.
Park, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for listening to this edition. If you like what Chris had to say, share this episode with your people. Share it with your sales and marketing team. Get with your leadership and see if there's a different way that you can approach how you are approaching your sales team and your employees to get them to buy into your brand story. And of course, if you like what you're hearing, go on iTunes and give us a rating and a review. That certainly helps us rise up in the other podcasts there and get more people hearing the business of story so that they too can craft and tell compelling brand stories that sell. And until next week, when we'll have another amazing guest on, just like Chris, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.